Now we move to next chapter. After winter comes spring, after spring comes winter. And we will hear voices from Tunisia, from Egypt, from Syria. And as we said at the beginning, this really much connects to the beginning of the Artist at Risk, because many of our first residents actually came from these countries, from these regions after the revolution. And our first speaker in this chapter is Yasmine Akrimi from Tunisia.
And behind us, we see some images from the actual revolution. This is the day in which Mubarak was overthrown on Tahrir Square. I think this is a good backdrop to this entire chapter on MENA and the entire Maghreb uprisings.
Yasmine Akrimi is a researcher and an activist from Tunisia, who has been researching social movements, economical justice in Maghreb region, and she will be also chairing the panel today. Welcome, Yasmine.
Hi, thank you a lot for this invitation and for this wonderful event. I'm really, really glad to being here. I want to start with just a little maybe overview of what happened 10 years ago and across these 10 years. I know it's a lot of responsibility, some of it, stressed to do that, but I really want to talk about it. So 10 years ago, on the 17th of December 2010, so Mohamed Bouazizi, a street vendor, set himself on fire in Sidi Bouzid, which is a rural, poor region of Tunisia. And this event, although not the first of its kind, triggered a chain of reactions that culminated in the toppling of the 23-year-old authoritarian regime of Ben Ali, as you all know. So followed a series of large-scale popular protests in different Arab societies and countries as Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, Sudan, Morocco, and across the regions, really. And a decade later, we are here assessing what happened and still talking about the legacy of the Arab Spring. So back then, really, nobody thought that leaderless, peaceful protests could overthrow an Arab regime, let alone several ones. As observers noted, and I remember I was very young, I was 16 at the time, it has never happened before, so why would it happen now? But something about that very specific momentum was different. It resonated differently with people, even the most apolitical ones, even my grandma, for example. It spoke to decades of humiliation, deprivation, frustration, anger. Protesters' slogans on the streets echoed the experiences of generations of Arab citizens, which citizenship didn't mean or never had any real meaning. And it felt very new and exciting. So that 2011 momentum created a new sense of camaraderie and union. I remember from old ladies throwing bottles of vinegar and milk from their windows to protesters to help them, to help us resist to the police's tear gas, to crowds chanting together, to congratulating each other on another dictator's demise in the streets of Cairo, of Damascus, of Sana'a, of Tunis. That sense of pride and power we felt as Arabs for the first time in our lives came from the reappropriation of our streets and really of our faiths. And today it is painful to think of the early days. It is more painful, for example, for Egyptians and Syrians than for Tunisians, but it's still painful to think of the early days of joy and optimism as the Arab Spring really became synonymous of shattered dreams of liberation and democracy and dignity. When we look at the so-called Arab world today, it is hard to imagine liberation movements ever happened in the midst of civil wars and new eras of dictatorships. So what happened? Why did it go bad? I think what happened is surprise. Surprise happened. The very reason why sudden movements motivated by popular anger succeeded in surprising lifelong regimes is also what caused their downfall, the downfall of these movements. I don't think we underestimated the brutality of the status apparatuses or the interests of the ruling classes in maintaining that status quo, but we missed the lack of any viable alternative, really. Dictatorship is, as Nasreen Malik noted, it is not just the rule of one man, it is about the sterilization of democracy, really. So there were no capable opposition parties, charismatic leaders, political programs, or any healthy media ecosystems to host and guide that transition. I think the revolutions failed because there were not enough forces necessary to the success of a revolution, not because there were too many countercurrents. Today, it is hard to see beyond the failure, the millions of displaced, of dead, of imprisoned. But a closer look to the way the post-2011 regimes, I think, are reacting and have been reacting, confirms an intuition we might all have in the region. And that is that the failure of an uprising does not equate the disappearance of the grievances that motivated that uprising. It is quite the contrary, actually. Anger is building up and regimes are increasingly paranoid. They're not allowing the slightest transgression, really. But that does not mean that people's discontent is disappearing. People's discontent is continue to push them into the streets, facing certain detention and often death. But both regimes and peoples, and I would really want to finish with that, know something that we didn't know 10 years ago. It can happen. It has happened before. And next time we will learn from our mistakes.
This is a very, very short notice that you've joined us because Ala Talbi also was going to be part of this panel. Your friend and colleague, a senior, representative of the movements in Tunisia, and we wish him the best of luck. Can you please pass those words to him? He's helping to organize resistance to the current, or the crisis that is shaking Tunis at this moment. And we also, as usual, don't hear it from our media. We'll have to leave it at that. But you'll be joining us for the panel after this. We'll just now move to this other board. See you in a moment. Thank you very much. Yasmine Akrimi.